When you look at the New York City skyline, it's easy to think it's just random, a bunch of buildings just thrown up wherever. But that couldn't be further from the truth. It's actually a very deliberate shape, one that's been carved out by technology, sure, and a whole lot of money, definitely. But most of all, it's been shaped by 100 years of rules. Rules that have told the city exactly how it's allowed to grow.
So take a look at this. This is New York back in the early 1900s. I mean, even then, the city was already reaching for the clouds, right? It was creating this silhouette that was just totally unique. But here's the thing. That ambition, that desire to go vertical, was about to cause some major problems. Problems that would force the city to completely rewrite the rules of how to build itself.
So it really makes you wonder, right? Why those specific shapes? Why all the pointy spires? Those step-like buildings, the open plazas, and now these super skinny towers? Well, the answer is actually a really fascinating story. It's a story of one problem after another, and some seriously clever solutions. All right, let's get into it.
All right, first things first, before you can shape the skyline, you have to be able to build it. The city had to solve the most fundamental problem of all. How do you even build that high in the first place?
Okay, so for like most of history, buildings were basically trapped by their own weight. Think about it. If you wanted to build higher with stone, the walls at the bottom had to be ridiculously thick just to hold everything up. And that just eats up all your valuable ground floor space, the part you can actually rent out. It put a serious limit on how high you could go and how ambitious a city could be. And then, boom, two absolute game changers show up. First, you get the steel frame. It's like giving the building a skeleton. Now the frame carries all the weight, so the walls can just be thin skins. And then you've got Elijah Otis and his safety elevator, which, finally made people feel safe enough to actually go up to those top floors. These two things together, they literally unlocked the sky.
Okay, so problem solved, right? We can build tall now. Well, not so fast, because as these buildings shot up, they created this huge unforeseen problem. The city was definitely getting taller, but it was also getting a whole lot darker. See, back then, there were no rules to stop them, so developers were just building straight up, cramming these massive buildings onto these tiny little 25 by 100-foot lots. The result was insane. You had tenements that used to house maybe 10 people suddenly packed with over 100, and the streets below, they became these deep, dark, suffocating canyons with no light or air.
And what I find really fascinating is that people freaked out. There was a real public outcry. Everyone was genuinely worried. I mean, these dark canyons weren't just ugly, they were seen as a legitimate public health crisis. For a city growing this fast, that was a huge deal. They had to do something. And the solution they came up with was this architectural rule called the setback. It's a really simple idea, actually. As your building gets taller, you literally have to step it back from the street. It's like carving away the top of the building, piece by piece, just to let the sunlight get down to the ground. And this is where you see the incredible power of just one law. In 1916, New York passes the very first comprehensive zoning law in America. I mean, this was a totally radical idea at the time. The city was now going to force builders to use setbacks. And by doing that, they literally sculpted the entire skyline into that iconic wedding cake shape you see everywhere. I mean, just look at the Chrysler Building. It is the absolute poster child for this era. That gorgeous terrace top, that's not just some random artistic flourish. No way. It is a direct, elegant, and beautiful answer to that 1916 law. The design was literally following the rules. So problem solved again, right? We've got light, we've got air, everybody's happy. Well, yeah, except the setback law fixed the problem way up high, but it accidentally created a whole new one way down on the street level. So while the tops of the buildings looked great, all sculpted and elegant, the bottoms were still these huge, solid walls of stone and brick. They were built right up to the edge of the sidewalk. The city basically became a bunch of imposing, sterile corridors. There was no breathing room, no public space, nothing. And then along comes the Seagram Building, and this thing changed everything. Instead of filling its entire lot like everyone else, it did something totally different. It was this sleek, bronze tower set way, way back from the street. And in front of it, a wide-open, welcoming public plaza. For the time, this was completely revolutionary. This one building inspired a whole new tool for the city's planners. It's called the Floor Area Ratio, or FAR.
The easiest way to think about it is like a budget. The city tells you, okay, based on the size of your land, you have a total floor area budget of X thousand square feet. You can build it tall and skinny or short and fat, do whatever you want as long as you don't go over your budget.
So in 1961, the city got smart and made developers a deal. It was a simple trade-off, really. They said, look, if you give the public a nice open plaza at the bottom of your building, we'll give you a bonus. We'll increase your FAR budget, which means you can build a taller and, let's be honest, much more profitable tower. And of course, developers jumped at that.
And that brings us pretty much up to the modern era and to the city's latest and maybe trickiest challenge. Land is getting crazy expensive and super scarce. So the question becomes, where on earth do you find more room to build?
I mean, by the time we get to the late 20th century, all the good spots are gone. If you're a developer and you want to build something really, really tall, you can't just buy more land. It's not there. You have to get creative. You have to find a totally new, kind of invisible raw material to build with.
And that invisible resource? It was literally thin air. The city created a market for something called air rights. It's a wild concept, but here's how it works. Let's say your neighbor is a small, historic building, and it's not using up its full FAR budget. You can actually buy their unused development potential, that empty space above their roof, and then legally stack it on top of your own building.
You know, it used to be that a building sat on one single piece of land. Simple. Not anymore. Today, it's way more complicated. Developers create these patchwork lots by buying up the air rights from all the buildings around them. They're basically stitching together a building site out of thin air, all so they can justify building something unbelievably tall.
And at the same time, the rules themselves got a lot more sophisticated. So instead of just saying your building has to have this step-like shape, the city created this new, much more abstract test. It's called daylight evaluation. And what it does is it measures exactly how much sky a new building silhouette would block when you're looking at it from different spots on the street.
Yeah, I know this chart looks super complicated, but it's the absolute key to understanding why we're seeing all these penciled-in skyscrapers today. The logic is actually pretty simple. A really slender tower has a tiny profile. It doesn't block much of the sky on this chart. And because it scores so well on this test, the city gives it permission to go insanely high.
And the ultimate result of all this? You get a building like 432 Park Avenue. It is the perfect storm of modern zoning laws. It's a tower that stitched together air rights from a bunch of its neighbors and used its super skinny profile to ace that daylight test. And that's what allowed it to soar to nearly 1,400 feet.
So when you think about it, from the invention of the elevator all the way to the invention of, selling air, New York's skyline has always been this physical diary. It's a record of the city's biggest problems and its most creative solutions. It's an autobiography written in steel and stone. And it just leaves you wondering, what's the next big problem going to be? And what new rules will they invent to shape the next chapter?